Hey guys, welcome back to the Salt and Light podcast. We're back for week 2, and Kurt's got a lot to do today. He said so.
I'm a busy man.
Kurt's a busy man. Right. We got to get right into it.
Yeah. Oh, hey, first question I had.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit of a teaser.
Okay.
For a week from this Sunday, I'm doing the message.
Whoa!
Right. So you want to invite your friends and neighbors.
Tune in.
They're letting you up there
and
on
your
the
family. Because we have this Made in Maine thing.
Yep.
Not to
Series.
be mistaken with the Maiden of Maine.
Maiden of Maine.
Right,
So we have to have a
Made in Maine
period of time at the front where we don't talk about Jesus, right? We talk about whatever is made in Maine. So I have to talk a little bit about Moxie.
Moxie.
And I've never tasted it. So where do I get some?
Any store, really.
The stores have it?
Soda.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's pretty
there?
much everywhere.
Okay.
You've never had Moxie before. Wow, that's crazy.
Can I give you an extra teaser?
Sure, why not?
I'm going to taste Moxie for the first time up on the stage.
on stage.
Wow.
You do not want to miss that.
See,
Yeah,
this is why you need to be listening to the Salt and Light podcast.
Yes.
Right.
Because for the other couple thousand people that aren't listening to this, they're going to be sitting there for the first time completely unaware that you're going to be drinking Moxie from
Well,
the
unless
stage.
the fervency of our listening audience gets that word out.
They're going to spread the word. Spread the word
Might be that way.
that
Yeah.
Kurt is drinking Moxie.
Yeah.
on
It is
stage.
Moxie.
Bring your friends
is a
and family.
polarizing.
I know. I
soda.
know this. Oh, speaking of polarization.
It is.
Okay.
So now that's the second one. So I've been looking at news articles because
Yeah.
you were aware there was a recent election.
Oh, what?
Yeah. And
There
so
was?
one of the things
president?
there are some I don't know, television pundits out there, and even psychiatrists. I saw one was a psychiatrist who suggested that it's okay to not invite your relatives to Thanksgiving who voted differently than you did.
Oh, it's okay to do
It's
that?
okay to release them and not invite them to your
Wow.
Thanksgiving. What do you think about that?
I think that's wrong.
That's it. Thanks for joining us today, folks.
I think that's ridiculous.
But
Yeah.
isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Because I suppose they're concerned about becoming their own tender selves getting hurt during that time.
Right.
Yeah.
It does tend to be one of those like conventional, stereotypical holidays where at least in like the movies or the TV shows that politics gets brought up, the controversial topics get brought up around the dinner table or whatever, and everyone's starting to break out into chaos. But I've never really had a Thanksgiving like that.
No,
Usually we just talk about like, hey, Billy, how's school going? Yeah, are you getting good grades? Like,
Yeah, and you don't
stuff
have to
like
talk
that.
about it, right?
Yeah, you don't
You
have
don't have
to.
to disinvite somebody.
No.
Some people will talk about it no matter what rules you make, but even that I think is just a symptom of our culture of being a little overly fragile of what ideas we deem to be acceptable. Because it's like, if you can't learn to navigate a space where somebody has a differing opinion than you, then you're going to very quickly bubble off your entire world from reality. Which is
Yeah,
not
I think for me that's what comes to mind. Like, actually, certainly it happens in the realm of politics, but even I had this thought this week. You take that out of it, and even our culture and our society, even within the church world, so even in like Western Christianity, I feel like the sensitivity around a differing opinion or like a controversial conversation is just so like polarizing, so heated, so quickly that it's a differing opinion is almost like considered unloving now. And like, even so, if we were to think about that in even like the church space, like I know we've talked about that before, even like the dangers of that when it comes to unity in the church or just in your family or whatever, wherever, like it poses such a risky thing. Certainly, like if you have a differing opinion with your spouse about like something vital for your child, or if your differing opinion is like, well, whether Jesus was God or not, and like on like an elder board of a church, those are big deals. Like there's some major things, but culturally in society is making it like, no, if you don't agree that the best shirt color is blue, we can't be at Thanksgiving together.
Right.
Well,
so also people are saying it's almost violent right?
Yeah, yeah. That's
just
a good way to put it.
disagreement.
Yeah, is a violent
and so you can't.
thing.
You have to be so careful. And I would rather have a hearty debate that you get to work through things. Otherwise, you're never going to work through anything because you're just going to be fearful of what somebody's going to do,
Right.
cancel you in some way. And so I would think a lot less gets done and thoughts and ideas done.
Why does it
You're
seem
looking at me
like
funny. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking like, why does it seem like our culture? Sorry, that was just my normal look. By the way, going back to the Moxie thing,
Yeah.
you have to. They say you have to sip it 3 times.
3 times?
Yeah, you can't just sip Moxie once. They say the first time it's such a different world that you don't even have like a reference experience for your first sip of Moxie.
Like psilocybin or something?
Yeah, it's just so
okay,
different.
yeah.
And then they said the second time it's like, okay. And by the third sip, you
Yeah.
really know whether you like it or not. That's what I've heard. You can correct me if the
other
listeners
thing
can
is-
correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I've heard.
I'm
is
not
you
going to be
have
able
do
to
it 3 times.
replicate my first taste during second service.
Oh, there's a
Right.
little behind the scenes.
Yeah, a little something. This is what we have to go through.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's tough.
Yeah.
So, boy, that's gonna really.
I'll tell that. I'll be upfront.
Yeah.
I'll say, but I'm gonna do it for you and see if my mind changes on it.
Maybe they can put up a
Right.
little text on the screen that says, "This is a reenactment of a true
I
event."
could do that. We
You
could
know,
film
What
it.
happened during
Of
the
what
You could do that,
happens.
right, Isaac? You could just put up my the first service video of me trying it.
Yeah, with such a
Isaac's
quick
mouth is
turnaround,
full.
definitely.
He's back there.
Yeah. As I'm
Caught
trying
him
to like
snacking.
swallow
So we
my
got
food.
off the polarization topic.
Yeah,
of-
Graham,
Yeah.
you were gonna
Yeah.
say something.
No, I was just trying to put my mind in a person who feels like they shouldn't invite a portion of their family over their house for Thanksgiving because they have a different differing political opinion. And I was like, what would be, if I was trying to like be as empathetic to that position as possible, why would they do that? And I'm just trying to think through like maybe they just feel like they want to control the atmosphere so much that they want it to be a really peaceful time where certain political topics aren't going to get brought up. I've noticed though, and I don't know if has always been this way, Kurt, that people get triggered by political stuff nowadays more maybe than ever. Sometimes you'll talk about something political and it might not even be overtly political. It could be something like whether or not you think you should get a certain type of vaccine or whether or not you should, whether or not, abortion's okay, which is kind of political. That's a pretty controversial topic.
It's funny
I guess.
because some would say it's political, some would say it's way beyond political.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some of those are moral
Yeah,
issues
yeah.
or they're philosophical issues. But I feel like sometimes the blood pressure just gets so high with people. And then all of a sudden, like I've seen people stand up and lose their minds, because of some of
Right.
this stuff. And it's almost like something takes over them.
So I think it's gotten quite a bit worse just in your your lifetime. So
Look at me, Graham. Graham's getting your funny bone.
When I said something takes over them, I made like a glance over at you, Jake.
so I'm curious, how, because what appears to be happening is people's defense mechanism seems to be closer and closer to the surface of the skin, and so it's triggered more quickly. So how do you handle something that offends you?
Right.
That's yeah. I might need to think about that for a second. I'd say a statement that I tell the family ministry team quite a bit when we're talking about the realm of like hard conversations, which I'd say is usually because of a disagreement. Someone's behavior is one way, or their response to something is one way, and so a hard conversation usually comes out of a disagreement about whatever. And so something that I always tell the team is like, when you know and are confident in the why behind a decision that you make or a rule that you have or a position that you uphold, when you can really, like, you've really worked internally around that, then it makes hard conversations a lot easier. I think that's why I have such an aversion to like exceptions or like working things around to try to like make it easier oftentimes, because a lot of times those will kind of fly in the face of the why behind things.
Right.
And so for me, and sometimes I feel a little bit too cut and dry oftentimes in meetings or whatever. And I think for me, when it comes to like disagreeing with somebody, I feel a lot more confidence, and I feel like my threshold, like you just said, like my defense mechanisms and threshold is lower most of the time. I'm not perfect for sure, but it's lower only because I do feel confident in the whys behind why my opinions are one way, or why my positions are one way. And then it is hard, I think, sometimes when you start to feel that the information that somebody might be giving you could change your opinion. That's more of a little bit of a vulnerable feeling, right? Like if somebody's telling you an opinion that's just so opposite of yours and it makes no sense based on your reasoning,
right,
that's not really scary or like threatening to me. Like if someone's just wildly off from what I believe, I'm like, oh, okay, like that's just their opinion and it doesn't threaten me. I think what's more vulnerable is like when someone really starts to make me think and I'm like, oh man, am I wrong on this? And I have to really like wrestle that down. I think that's the practice that our culture's out of practice doing. Like it is, like you said, it's almost violence and a hate crime to like disagree. And it's like, no, we're not all going to agree about tons of things. Big things, little things, everything in the middle. You have to be willing to think, wow, there's a ton of things I don't know, a ton. And so there's all kinds of people who might, and even the idea of somebody being smarter or more well educated than you is so specific to one area. So like somebody might not know, academics as well as another, but in one area they're like brilliant. And so it's like you have to kind of come to the table understanding, man, there's a lot of people who know a lot more about topics than I do. And so, try to wrestle those down.
Yeah, there's a humility, I think, that it's hard to cultivate because when I get offended, it's usually when I want to be right. And I feel strongly about something, or I feel like I'm getting, if I get offended or I get defensive, maybe it's because I feel like I'm backed into a corner. But usually that's only something that you put yourself in a perception that you're placing on yourself in that moment. And so sometimes if I'm feeling offended or I feel like someone is making points that I've never heard before that are against what I believe, I need to like bring the stakes down a little bit. And one thing I forget what book it is, but I was listening to someone talk about Dallas Willard, and they were saying that he would regularly make it a practice to give other people the last word in a conversation, especially if they disagreed with him. And it was like a spiritual practice for him to give other people the last word, because Dallas Willard, he's written many books, he's lectured, super smart guy, but he didn't want to make it his goal to try to eviscerate people in debates. He wanted other people to be heard and for him to express himself. And I think that's a kingdom mindset in a lot of ways, of knowing that you don't always have to be right. And a lot of people, many people aren't always convinced by us giving them a really eloquent argument against them. Sometimes people are convinced by just people being loving and caring towards them. And I do think the truth is important. I think if you know something to be true or you have an opinion on something, you should express it. But I don't think we should always feel like we have to get all huffy and riled up and feel like we have to have a response to everything. But I've felt that way a lot, especially growing up in public school. Whenever people would attack the faith, I felt like this is my moment. I have to defend the faith. Even if it was like a teacher in the classroom and they said something I didn't agree with, I felt like I needed to like voice my opinion and like raise my hand. And some of the teachers, I'm sure, didn't really like me very much for that. But I felt like I needed to always be defending the faith. And I think sometimes there is something to be said about that, but other times it's like you don't always have to put that pressure on yourself.
Probably my biggest problem with it is if I'm coming to a meeting or something and I'm prepared to go in one direction and someone's going to try to
Why are you looking at me?
make me not go in that particular direction. But ultimately, it's.
Did I just get defensive
I hear it. I hear. I look at it, and because I'm supposed to be a new creation, there shouldn't be a Kurt to offend.
Yeah.
So when you really kind of look at it, it shouldn't ever be there. That what can you say to me that is now going to hurt me? Because an offense, you think about the deep part of it, you're making me less. Well, I'm supposed to be as less as possible. Mm-hmm. And so it shouldn't be there, which is when you talk about Dallas Willard doing it as a spiritual exercise, I think that's great because the reason he does it as a spiritual exercise is because he knows that he could well up and have a problem with that. So I remember I heard him say that, I think, on a YouTube thing once. And that's such a good thing. Because one thing, though, is to recognize that you could be prone to doing that. Mm-hmm. That's helpful. So otherwise you kind of blow up, and then you try to justify yourself all the time.
Yeah, I think if as I was thinking about it, you look at it in the negative. So thinking back to the original question around like the not inviting people over for Thanksgiving dinner because of differing opinion, and we had said like, well, what's at the root of that? I'm like, man, as I think about it in the ways that I've done it, it actually is the opposite of that, where it comes from a place of pride and almost like pettiness, where like if I think about like whether it's in parenting with Jordan or like a disagreement with a sibling or a friend or whatever, I'll make a decision that in my mind punishes them. Like I'll be like almost, it's passive aggressive.
Yeah.
And I'll like, just make it difficult. And I think the choice to not invite family to Thanksgiving because of a differing political opinion is less about not wanting to create a scenario around like a heated debate. I think it's more of a way to punish them for their choice, which is petty, obviously, and or at least in my opinion. But I think that's that's at the root of it. It's almost the beginning of a root of like bitterness or unforgiveness. Because if you weren't bitter or you didn't have unforgiveness, it wouldn't really bother you anymore. There'd be nothing to offend. You'd be like, well, we disagree, and that's okay. I still love them, and then you'd move on. Yeah. But I think that's even a bigger, as we talk about freedom and being clean and Jesus making us whole. We talk all the time about unforgiveness being this monumental stronghold for the enemy, and it's like all of what we've just been talking about is the root. That's the beginning, or even maybe a little further along of like this root of unforgiveness and bitterness. That's so dangerous.
Well, you think about that. They're going on national television or in the news, and they're perpetuating this. Right. It's kind of like giving people permission to have more and more conflict with them. Kind of like if I said, hey, when you go out today, kick as many people in the shin as you can. I mean, it just makes no sense.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
It's validating something that's really strange behavior. And, at least how I usually think of it is people used to say like God, family, then country or ideas. Like there used to be like an order to things, where it's like you put God first, then you have your family next, and then you worry about what's going on in the nation or your political ideas. But it's weird how politics has become such an idol in our country, where people have put politics up on the level of God, where God should be, and even to a place where it's separating families. And I just think that's really sad, where it's like, if there's anyone you should have things in common with, that you should be bonded together with, it should be your own flesh and blood, your own family members who you share, lives with, and you spend a lot of time with, and you do holidays with. And to me, that's really sad. And it shows you that it's a out of place priority, and that people are putting this in a position it shouldn't be. But think of the contrast between that and Jesus's ministry, right? Like Jesus brought together these disciples from all kinds of different walks of life. He had a tax collector, he had a zealot, he had the fisherman, he had, Mary Magdalene, who was thought maybe she was like a woman of the night, and so
Been watching your Chosen episodes. That's
woman
good.
of the night.
Yeah.
But didn't it say? Doesn't it say she had 7 demons in her, or something like that? Yeah. But they're all brought together and unified, although they're all so different because of Jesus. Right. And that's something that this culture needs desperately, is something that's going to bring us all together. And we live in a weird time where I think there was maybe a time 20 years ago, 30 years ago, where people would go, well, we're all still Americans. But it almost seems like that's now a platitude for people that's not cutting it anymore, where they're like, no, my version of America is so different from yours that I can't even agree on that. Like the e pluribus unum thing. It's not really bringing people together. And I think this shows our need for a transcendence for Jesus to bring us together that goes beyond politics, that goes beyond that kind of stuff. But
tell us about your family members that you don't get along with.
Oh, yeah?
By name.
All right. Well, first of all.
No. Yeah, you said earlier that something that just jumped out to me, where you said, like, that love, moving forward with love wins people over at a much greater rate. Or maybe I inferred that from what you said, but I think you talk about Jesus' ministry, and that he didn't compromise on truth, but also was so humble in the way that he moved about that there wasn't that offense to be taken. Like there were times where he was accused and he didn't even respond. And it's like, man, that's so anti our culture, where it's like we're so quick to defend ourselves and we're so quick to justify our reasons for doing things. And it's like Jesus didn't have to justify anything.
Right.
And yet he remained quiet and took what happened to him with humility. Yep. And we, I'm just always reminded of that verse, like, and a servant isn't greater than his master. And if Jesus did that, it's like, man, we have to be so, but it's a practice, just like the Dallas Willard thing. It's this constant reminder, because it does not come naturally to us.
Right.
We want to build our own kingdom.
We're not greater, but he says, but we have to be like our master.
Right.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, if Jesus was on CNN or whatever, mainstream media, and he had his moment to share advice for people of who they should invite over on Thanksgiving, he would tell them to invite the poor over their house, probably. But then he'd also say, invite your enemies to your house too, because anyone can throw a party for the people that love them, right? They're going to throw a party back for you, but invite your enemies to your house and invite the people who voted differently from you, because showing them love goes twice as far in the kingdom of God. You know what I mean? And so it's just, to me, that's what the kingdom's all about. And that's why it's so sad. It's not about staying in our comfort zone in this kind of insulated world where everyone agrees with us. It's about loving the people who don't always agree or don't always look the same way or things like that.
Yeah, and even how you said, like, around like the priorities being out of place. What it shows me too, and I was just thinking about this, like, it shows that there's nothing that can withstand the weight of a people being unified around other than Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter if it's family, because we've seen all through history tons of powerful large families crumble because of individual, like, agendas. Like, so family, even bloodlines can't bring ultimate unity. Like, locations and kingdoms can't bring unity. So it doesn't matter if you look at the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire,
right,
the United States, whatever, every, like, kingdom or whatever can't bring unity to a people. Not even churches. So we see tons of division in churches, whether it's, Baptist churches or Lutheran or Methodist, whatever. We see all these fractures in churches, and and it's with everything. What it begins to boil down is just show you, like, apart from Jesus, nothing will bring unity. It can't withstand the weight of our own personal, like, agenda.
Right. And it's not even shouting his name. It's that he's incarnate in us.
Yeah, it's a submitting to his authority, him being the thing.
Yeah. It was interesting. So yesterday we were out walking on the streets downtown, and Reverend Jeff went with us.
Nice.
Yeah. And so it was
Has he ever been out with you before?
Not like that. I've gone to a homeless encampment with him once, but it was funny. So
when
we're
someone
down.
hits the streets with you, Kurt, do they like go up a couple rungs in your like your book?
Well,
Do they have like some more street cred in your?
I appreciate them
eyes.
more. I invite them to my Thanksgiving celebration.
Nice.
But so we're walking along and around Portland, Oxford, Preble area, and Tom and I were looking at each other because it was just funny. There had to have been 10 people that just shouted his name and ran over to
Really?
him, hugged him. Oh yeah, he was a rock star out there. And it's so interesting because he works for the jail, so all these people were in.
Sure,
and
yeah.
but because he represented something to them about the jail, they wouldn't have done that with the COs that were walking
No,
in.
no.
Probably just the
probably.
opposite.
But every one of them just had a hug,
wow.
talk about what they've been. And these people were just like sitting on the sidewalk,
Yeah.
drug-addled. They
Yeah.
were getting up and talking to him.
Wow.
I'm trying to figure out, I'm still trying to figure out, all right, what do I do with this? I mean, he's got a natural ability with anybody. If you go in a restaurant with him or something, he's doing that. But there was something more that was just attractional about that as well, that it just tells you how much you exuding love to others makes you attractional to them, as opposed to everything we've been talking about, which repels people.
Right.
And the whole topic was, how do you repel your family more by not inviting them to Thanksgiving? And here, when you reach the poor, like you're talking about, there was just like probably was an appreciation that they saw him walking in their place where they were in his place at one time.
Right. Right.
But it was fascinating.
That's
Yeah,
really
that's
cool.
really very powerful. And I think even what it's not about forgiveness, but even with story applies where it says like she loves more because she's been forgiven more. You love little because you've been forgiven little. Those people probably in their minds were very undeserving of love, and yet when they were in, Reverend Jeff probably was very kind and loving to them, and so there's extra gratitude there, just like very overwhelming. And then especially for him to come into like their world, then it's not just talk, and it's not talk's cheap. They're like seeing his actions exude the love that he preached, which is pretty. That's like a very cool story. Very powerful.
It also shows you the amount of impact that he's had, that people on the street would just recognize him.
Oh, yeah.
And that they wouldn't forget about him, but they would notice him and call out to him. Because sometimes you see somebody out in public, but you're not always going to call out to them in the middle of like Walmart or something.
Oh, it's funny
like
because
that,
there's a couple occasions. So a lot of times people will just kind of have like a big hood on or something, and they're kind of just
down in the
draped
dumps.
over. And he saw someone he kind of recognized. He walked over to him. The guy looked up and said, and he just got all excited, like Santa Claus just came by or something.
Do they do
Sounds
that for
like
you?
need to bring Reverend Jeff down.
No, I say that. We start to have relationships out there, and we've thought those have been nice, but this just
paled
blew
in
them away.
comparison.
Yeah, it wasn't close.
I mean, I just think that's got to be the way probably people respond to like Mother Teresa, or whenever they saw like even like a Billy Graham or something, and just like, oh my goodness, you know.
That doesn't happen to you when you walk around in public. You don't get a lot of gasps and
No, not the gasps,
ogling, and
not as much. No, maybe from kids.
I bet.
I'll say that. Like,
I think it was Claire during Sully's birthday party the other weekend. She just walked right up to you and gave you a big hug.
yeah.
And at first, I think you were wondering, oh, did you think I was your dad? But
Yeah.
I think she just recognized you from Sundays.
Yeah, and then she just like looked and waved at
But
me.
Kurt, isn't Jake just like the most cuddly little?
Oh, very much.
I mean, don't you just want to give him a hug?
From my own experience, he is cuddly. Yeah.
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 Oh, go on. Tell me more.
Yeah, no, I gave Kurt a big old hug when he came back from his sabbatical.
Oh yeah.
which
yeah,
is
no, I appreciate that.
yeah.
You even texted me on my sabbatical.
I did.
Yeah.
I missed you.
You're
Yeah,
the only one.
Wow.
Oh, Graham.
I wanted to
Yikes.
respect your space.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from this, though, is on Sunday, make sure you go up and give Kurt a big hug if you see him out on the turf. I think he
You'd
would
love
love
that.
that.
That's what I'm about.
That's what he wants.
But I will say, like, I have seen kids do that. So there was one time I was at the grocery store and I had parked and I got out of my car, started walking, and then there was a car with a window rolled down. And this kid was like halfway out of the window and his mom had no idea what was going on. He's like, Mr. Jake, Mr. Jake. And he's like yelling, trying to get my attention. And his brother's like trying to get out of the same window to say hi. And they don't act like that when they're here and see me. But it was just this like, oh, I know him. And then the outside of context. But kids don't have that filter of like, what's appropriate, like what is socially acceptable. So they just let their emotions ride. And, it's like such a sweet, because it's like innocent almost that they, think, and because, there's nothing special. Like, I don't even like I said, it's not like that on a Sunday.
Yeah.
But I think so often, and I see this a lot, like our safety team does a really good job. The kids like are so excited to see them. And I think we really underestimate, probably Jeff did too, underestimate the impact that you're making when it's like a day-to-day thing. Like, well, I'm just doing my job. Oh, I'm just here. But the way you love people, just that little extra bit, you have no idea what's happening on the other side with that other person and the impact that could be making.
Yeah.
For sure.
That consistency adds up. Do you think there's like part of that too, of kids being uninhibited in that way? Is that what Jesus is like commending children for in the Gospels when he says we should be like them? Do you think that's part of it, or do you think it's different? Like I think we should come to him like that, or
I don't think that's the whole of it when he was talking about that. I think that's probably a part of it, but I think it's it more has to do with that, the lack of I think one of the biggest things, I was talking about this morning with Brandon, one of the biggest things that keep us from Jesus is our desire for control. Yeah. Like we want to control every variable. We want to control, like we even want to like.
We want to control everyone who's at Thanksgiving
dinner.
Dinner.
Control the relationship. Yeah. We want to control behavior. We want to control expectation.
Right.
Literally every aspect of not only our lives, but everyone who has impact over our lives. Right. We want to control it. In our relation, like there's no way to come to Jesus with that. You can't hold on to that and still like surrender to him.
I think it hurts him.
Oh, sure.
It grieves him. I'll use the word grieve. Jesus doesn't have church hurt, maybe.
Yeah. Hopefully not.
It grieves him when we don't. And you think about, especially now, what he went through so we could have that familiarity with him, right? I no longer call you servants, I call you friends.
Right.
And what we do is we walk around thinking we're unworthy. We shouldn't do that. And we've got to hold him at arm's length because of who he is. And that just got to bum him out when we don't come to him like little children.
Yeah.
So I think that's one piece of, because there's so many aspects of coming to like a little child. But to run up to him and engage him, sit on his lap and play and all of that, I think we're missing out because we're trying to be stoic in the way we deal with him. And he literally wants to be one with us. He and the Father are going to make their home in us. Yeah. There's just so much of that we're not indulging in right now that he would have us do.
And it does sound very nice in some ways to give up control, but the fear is definitely there. Like just the other week I was listening to a podcast and it was interviewing this Catholic priest, and there was a decent amount that he said that I didn't agree with, but there was this one thing he said that made me think, is he's like, pray to God that you can be a saint, that like people could look at you like you might look at a Reverend Jeff or Billy Graham or Mother Teresa. Like ask God to make you into a saint. And I guess there's a semantic debate around that too. I guess we're all saints when we're saved in Christ. But I think what he was getting at is like that you're giving your life over completely to Jesus. Yeah. And there was just part of me that was like, that's kind of a scary prayer in some ways, of like, God, make me a saint for you. Like take my whole life. I want to give it all over to you so I can be of complete service to you. Like what would that entail? And I think the scary thing is I have no idea. Yeah. I don't know what that would entail. I hope I'm like living into that every single day, But then I'm sure there are many areas in my life where there's blockages and fears where I'm like, I don't even know if I would be willing to entertain certain things that God might want to do through me because my faith isn't quite there yet.
Jay, could you give Graham all the reasons that they're keeping him from being a saint?
Graham's a saint in my eyes.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Jake.
That's nice. That's right. A lot of love going on here.
Yeah,
right
you
there.
know,
That
we'll do one of these.
You're like really close too.
Oh,
Love overcomes a multitude of sins. There you go.
You're like
That's
you're
just-
like getting there.
oh, I
Wow.
appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah.
Isaac, you want to talk to me? These guys are having a bromance over here.
Yeah, just a bromance going
It's
on.
like when you say I love you and they don't say it back and you're like, no, say it back.
Yeah. Go on. No, I think so. Even in lines of that, there's an element I'd say culturally, or I've seen a bunch where we will sometimes portray this sense of false humility, skirting the responsibility that comes with that prayer.
Yeah.
So I think of like Paul when Paul wrote like, "Follow me as I follow Christ."
Yep.
Paul wasn't skirting the responsibility of being a leader in the church, like being somebody that others could look to follow Jesus. And I think culturally we often will say like, no, I'm nothing special. Like, don't look at me. Like, you know, you can do your own thing. Don't
Right.
follow what I'm doing. And it seems humble. It seems really humble at first glance. And sometimes it might be, but I think oftentimes if I'm honest about my heart, a lot of times it's because I don't want the responsibility and the weight of like leading somebody to Jesus by my life, you know? And I think we got to be careful of that because it is not, we've talked about this before, it's not about how close to the line of being apart from Jesus can we
Yeah.
get while staying with him. Like that's such a bad way to live. And honestly, we'll never indulge in who he is.
No.
And so what we want to do is be like, God, in my own strength, I can't be somebody that people should follow, but
Yeah.
would you make me into that person and help me give over the reins? But boy, it's a convicting and heavy prayer if you really think about, like you just said,
Yeah.
the weight of it, because you don't know, and then it comes with responsibility.
Right.
You know, there's even passages that say like those who teach and things will be held, you know, to a greater standard,
Yeah.
and judged more severely because there is weight that comes with it. But boy, woe to us if we're, you know, not just us in ministry, but just general believers, if we don't want to move more and closer into intimacy with Jesus because we're afraid of the responsibility that comes with it.
Right.
It's like, boy, you're really missing the forest for the trees there. Yeah, that's just what came to mind.
Yeah, and
as you were
sometimes
talking.
those massive fears of being like, well, I don't know what it would look like to give my whole life over to Jesus. What if he calls me to like India or some kind of grand act of service? I think sometimes those fears are almost convenient fears to keep us from doing the simple things that we know we're not doing on a daily basis of following him. When it's like, sometimes it's actually not that big and grandiose and complicated. Like, to give an analogy, it's almost like sometimes you see certain people when they talk about health and fitness. I feel like I always give this as an example. They're like, I just don't know what the perfect diet is. Well, you probably know though that like lots of Little Debbie's and ice cream every single night is not the perfect diet. So maybe just like start by not doing that. You know what I mean? And so it's not overcomplicating things too much. And I think that's the beauty of the gospel as well, and the abiding relationship with Jesus is it's like, it doesn't always look like having all the answers or necessarily getting the next ticket to India or Africa, but maybe it's saying, I think tonight I'm gonna spend some quality time with him and get in his presence.
Yeah.
You know,
It's almost like in abiding, if we're doing what you're talking about, if you're doing that, when the India equation comes up, you'd say sure,
yeah,
because you've already given yourself to him, rather than have to make a choice to give yourself to him when that comes up. Because I don't think we're capable of that, and it would be for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, so I have a question for you, Kurt. I know for me, what you just described, Graham, is like so true. Hits really close to home where in a lot of different things, not just health and fitness, but in a lot of areas of my life, I have a problem looking for optimal
Yeah.
and like having a hard time just moving towards something better if it's not optimal. Like I just can't get past like, well, what's the best way? No, there has to be a best way.
Right.
And it will hang me up, and it has in a ton of different areas of my life. And I know we've talked about that before, and you said you've struggled with that before. But I'd say, Kurt, like I don't get that from you oftentimes. Like you have a real good optimism of like moving just forward, like, and you encourage me in that a lot of times, especially if I'm like telling you about frustrations and things like that. You're just like, yeah, but it's better than it was. And so, and I think that's actually way more successful. How have you consciously thought about that? Is it something you work through, or is that kind of just your natural personality?
I would say Jesus has created the ability to think that, not the ability. He allows me to think that way.
Okay.
Because, and I think we find that through Acts, through the Gospels, and Jesus's intentionality. But so if we use the example, for instance, of evangelism, where we think we're going to go out and convert people. But the more you abide, you realize you just had nothing to do with that. It's all a Holy Spirit thing. And so we get to rely on Him. And so kind of what you're talking about, the incremental pieces, they come, that awareness comes out of almost a dissatisfaction, because you have to look back and say, well, wait a second, over the last year, look at all these things that have taken place. I think a lot of it comes from getting older too.
Sure.
But what if you don't do that, then you're just going to give up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an all or nothing
Yeah.
mentality, which is super dangerous.
Yes, and so we're called to so if you look at every one of the letters to the 7 churches, it's all about overcoming, and it was all about this perseverance and looking at the big picture and going through it. And then at the end of that, every one of those things that He was going to give you, a stone or sit on the throne with Him, all of those, all had to do with Him being the prize.
Yeah.
Which, so maybe this is the answer. If Jesus is the prize and we can experience eternal life right now, we get to have the prize now while we move forward with Him. And I guess that's the only way really to do these things.
And there's grace in that too. And I feel like what you just described is kind of like a growth mindset of when you come close to Jesus, He helps you to acknowledge that you have imperfections, but not get so legalistic that you get hung up on them that you can't even like move past the fact that you have them in the first place, And so it's kind of recognizing, even in my weaknesses, He's going to be strong through that, and He's going to be glorified, and His grace is going to be strong where I am weak, because if you think about it, if as a Christian, and I think a lot of young Christians, at least when I was baptized and really made it my goal to follow Jesus, I didn't really have a good growth mindset. I thought, man, okay, I have a blank slate now. I better not mess this up. I got to move forward in the optimal way. And then when I inevitably failed, I was really down on myself, and I was like, dang it, like, what am I doing? And then because of that all or nothing mindset, I would fall into like a shame spiral, and I would just I would like go on like a sin spree or whatever. I'd be like, well, I messed up, so I'm throwing up my hands, and I'm just going to lean into it, I guess, at this point.
That's the nothing from the all or nothing.
I'm going to binge eat the Little Debbie's now, Yeah. And so it's like, but no, when you have grace, when you're close to Jesus, He gives you grace, and that that's part of a growing process, that you're not going to be perfect, and that's okay.
Hollywood just accentuates this, because I get upset at it when we're watching TV shows. I think I might have mentioned this before, that it seems like a big part of the plot line quite often is somebody being involved in some situation that harmed somebody else or did something, and then they spend a quarter to a third of the episode getting through their remorse. Oh, so I did this. It's my fault. And it's really frustrating because it's so detrimental to get to any kind of joy or
Just
getting
wanna
anything
slap 'em
done.
a couple times, Kurt.
Just shake 'em
Snap
by
out
the,
of it.
by the
Come
neck.
on, man.
And,
Wake up.
It really bums me out because Jesus just wouldn't have that. I mean,
Right.
we're to come to mourn, wail, all of those things in James, but that's all because we're supposed to see who we are in front of Jesus. So if we're following after him, and I do something to disappoint somebody, and they, I don't know, do something else, I can't. If I sat in that swill, then Satan is winning.
Oh yeah.
And I don't want to give him a handhold on that.
Mm-hmm. And the pity party can be from a place of pride.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
You
for
know.
sure. Yeah.
And it can be from a place of also not wanting to take ownership of what you've done by trying to feel so bad about yourself that you hope by you sitting in the pity party that the person kind of feels bad for you, rather than trying to just take ownership, get back up and make it right, bring restoration to the problem.
Yeah.
And it's also putting your actions at such a level, at such a high stake, that is a prideful thing as well, because you're like, oh, that was such an epic failure. When in reality, it's probably a sin that's not uncommon to mankind. Like it's like,
for
other
sure.
people have done that, and you're not alone in that, and the grace of God is sufficient for you.
Yeah.
So
wanna-
we get,
Yeah.
And then one of the frustrations that happens all the time in our ranks is people, we want to see them abiding, we want to see them getting in the Word and prayer, and they'll talk about their frustration of that. It's too hard, and this happens. When Brother Lawrence talks about if you're getting in God's presence and your mind wanders and you're off somewhere that you shouldn't be, he says, you just get up, brush yourself off, and say, God, if you're not going to help me, there's no way I'm going to be able to be with you. And then you just move forward with him.
Right.
Recognize, that's not where I wanted to be, but here's where I want to be. You don't languish in what happened, because, again, what's going to please Jesus more? That you feel bad or that you go after him again? And that's the choice we make, and we often just dive down into the pit.
Well, we have the classic example with fitness, and it's so relatable to following Jesus, is they're like, well, I screwed up my diet on Friday, so I'll just wait till Monday to start again. Like this,
Right.
like idea that there's like your body doesn't know that it's Monday,
Right.
and so, and the reality is that the number of times people start and quit a diet or a healthy lifestyle, whatever,
Yep.
if they had even if they had done it only at 10% is good, but they had stuck with it, their results would be amazing. So it's with Jesus, like that if we mess up and we think like, oh man, like, and we just like bemoan and labor it or just stay in it. It's like, man, if you had just turned back and kept going after him, you wouldn't keep falling. Like you'd actually make progress towards him.
And you squander the cross every minute you stay there.
Yeah. But there's something in us that just like this, it's this all or nothing. Like, no, I have to I don't know how many times, and I don't want this to like be taken out of context. I know we've talked about it before, but the Bible reading plans on YouVersion,
Yeah.
I understand the value of that for some people.
Yeah.
But the number of conversations that I have had with people where somebody starts that with good intentions and they
Right.
treat it like a diet, they fall off because of whatever it is.
They get behind.
And they get behind, and it's the shame and the guilt of that actually leads them way away from Jesus.
Right.
They actually they feel such they feel like they've disappointed God so bad because they've gotten off their reading plan
Right.
that they'll go weeks, sometimes months without going back to God. It's like, boy, what a tragedy.
They've
Yes.
confused the means with the ends.
Yes. Yeah.
They were saying, I'm going to accomplish something rather than this is just my path to Jesus.
Right. Which you said this the other day that I thought was really good. Go ahead and say like I think you even said it last episode, what God said about reading your Bible.
Oh, yeah.
Apart.
No, yeah, John 5.
Yeah.
That saying to the Pharisees, Well, then with the second half of it in there, says to the Pharisees, you search through the scripture because you think by them you have eternal life. I tell you the truth, all the scriptures do is testify about me. Then he says, yet you refuse to come to me for life. So they're all in the scriptures,
right?
But they're not going after life.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the Holy Spirit, I think, said to you, like, don't read apart from me.
And Adam
Right,
was supposed Isaac was supposed to get us a clock.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Are we over time?
We're getting in there.
I think we're right in there, yeah.
The landing zone.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
can land. You guys feel good about landing?
I feel good about landing.
We'll drop
yeah.
the landing equipment and
yeah. So, but this was an awesome podcast, and I have a lot of questions. Who do I reach out to?
Your shameless plugs are so
because
good.
man, I just need my questions answered. And how do I ask my questions, Jake? Where do I go?
Yeah. Thanks for being with us. If you have questions or you have topics that you would like us to touch on, because we're always up for a good conversation around whatever topics, you can email those to saltandlight@eastpoint.church. But honestly, at this point, I think we would just love to get some interaction with the listening audience. So would you do us a favor and send us a question to that email?
Wow.
Have a great week.
That was sweet.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks.